So yeah, thank you very much for enabling Northrop to come in and speak to this group. I really think Todd has done a wonderful job bringing forward the importance of COM and Milsatcom to the discussion, and I think it's a very vital topic that we discuss. At the highest levels, I believe as we go forward and address the issues of capabilities and affordability that we need in the DoD, technology is the key enabler to providing the means in the future to really continue to advance our capability and to do it affordably. And as we look at technology across our weapon systems and infrastructures and the rest of the DoD of engaging and executing the CONOPS and the missions that they need to support, we believe strongly that communications is the foundation upon which technology is built. And that is a very important thing, because as we look in our daily lives at the technology and how it is built on communications, I think it's very analogous to what's happening in the DoD. And as we see that infrastructure and the billions we spend on the weapons and the infrastructure and everything else that we are developing to execute our missions and scenarios, COM is becoming growing importance to being able to fulfill that mission. And we believe, as we look at the COM infrastructure that we are building DoD on right now, it's a growing potential to be an Achilles heel in the future. In fact, as you look at how technology is advancing and how our adversaries are advancing, not only are the threats advancing, but the technology that they are leveraging and the cycle times that technology is coming at us is coming quicker and quicker, and the technology is getting greater and greater. We are no longer afforded the situation that we've had in the past, where we can outspend our adversaries by tens of thousands to one moving forward. And so we need to find capabilities, and we need to find a communication foundation that will support the mission that we have to execute in the future in a much more affordable way and a much more resilient way, because the current systems will not be able to withstand the threats and the technologies that the adversaries will have at their hands. And so it's extremely important for us to address this topic of resiliency, and it's extremely important for us to address the topic of affordability. And I want to talk just for a minute about the synergy of those two. Many times people think resiliency is something that should cost a lot. I believe there's tremendous synergy between affordability and resiliency, and if we do it right, we can improve our affordability and we can improve our resiliency tremendously. And given the mission of the DoD is to execute in warfighting areas, resiliency and affordability is going to be key. Given the importance of resiliency, I think it's extremely important as we go forward that we have an approach that we can discuss, define, and measure and validate, that we understand what resiliency in these systems are, so that when a system is looked upon to execute a scenario, we know exactly how resilient that system is, how much capability it's going to provide us, and where that system is going to break. Northrop Grumman has provided a proposed context, and I know a lot of others in the community in both industry and the government have proposed approaches to resiliency. We believe it's extremely important as we move forward in trying to measure resiliency of a system that it's both measurable and verifiable, and that the approach that's used can be repeated by the whole community. It's not just something that I've done uniquely in my cubbyhole, subjectively, etc., that I can't pass on to others and repeat that. In that light, we've developed an approach where we believe you can define resiliency of a system by defining threat systems that can break a system. And much like you assess any of our DoD systems, You can assess the design, the capability, etc., and we have well-established disciplines to do that. We believe you can do the same thing with the threats that can break the system. And in that light, one of the best evaluation tools for measuring resiliency and for measuring the capability of our system is cost. And so if we develop a system that costs $30 billion, but we can break the system for $5 million, you have a measure that can be very intuitively understood, but it can also be brought into the designs of those systems and very clearly identified and verified. Sure. With that understanding, we've looked at a whole host of different systems and looked at COM in general, and we found some very simple principles that come out of that understanding. The first is that if you're looking at resiliency of a system, you've got to deal with asymmetric threats. Any system that all of our space systems, whether it's commercial systems, unprotected systems, protected systems, etc., when you cost account of the satellites, the terminals, the ground segments, etc., the cost of the systems are billions of dollars. Any system that is vulnerable to asymmetric threats, generally ground-based threats, that can be taken out for thousands or millions of dollars, if you can have 10 or 20 10K jammers that can take out a $30 billion system, you have an asymmetric threat. Any system that is vulnerable to asymmetric threats has very little resiliency to it, because both the adversary can provide a tremendous amount of capability in attacking you, but he has the cost advantage to continue that, and it's only going to get worse with the duty cycles and technology that's growing. One of the reasons we have the potential of a day without space is because 95% of our space systems are vulnerable to asymmetric threats. They're vulnerable to things like jammers, to deployed munitions, guided munitions. They're vulnerable to cyber attacks, etc. If our space systems were not vulnerable to asymmetric threats, a day without space would be a daunting task for the adversary, but that's not the case. The actuality is they can take out most of our space with asymmetric threats, and then the one or two systems that might need something more expensive, they can go at it, but then that's not a very big challenge. Our biggest challenge in front of us is not to move and worry about space as much as it is to deal with the asymmetric threats. The system that's most well known for having dealt with the asymmetric threats is Advanced EHF and Milstar, where they have developed a system with crosslinks, with no fiber dependency, no foreign ground dependency, mobile backups in CONUS, a strong waveform, etc., so that asymmetric threats are not a viable potential to take the system out. Now, as technology advances, as the cycle times advance, we need to continue to expand that capability to make sure that asymmetric threats continue to not be a vulnerable effort there. But one of the first points that I think we have to deal with is that in the future, asymmetric threats are going to become very, very robust, and they're going to become available to almost everybody. And so we need to deal with the asymmetric threat. If you can move the battle to space, then you've moved to a whole different domain where there's only a few adversaries can get there, and it's going to cost billions of dollars to go after them. That doesn't mean we don't have to address that, but that moves us to a whole different plateau of adversary that we have to do. And that's a huge issue here in dealing with day without space. The reality is that we've learned in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force how to become the superior force and take the high ground. We need to do that in space also. And the biggest issue here, I think, is moving the battle to space. Take away the asymmetric threats. The second part of the analysis that we've done and think is very verifiable with real data is that we've looked at if the battle is then moved to space, what do you do? And we think there's a stair step of plateaus that you move up from a system that has a single node of vulnerability to a system that has multiple nodes that you have to attack to be able to take it out, to a system that has not only multiple nodes but multiple orbits that they have to go after, to a system that has multiple nodes, multiple orbits, and can maneuver against threats, to a system that has multiple nodes, multiple orbits, can maneuver, and can reconstitute after an attack. Let me say one other thing here, and that is I think this chart not only works for our capability, but it also works for the adversary. If an adversary was to attack space, guess where their greatest vulnerability would be? It would be in those vulnerable ground nodes, the tracking stations, the command and control, the vulnerable ground assets that they require to command their threat systems. And so if the adversary did take the battle to space and come after space, probably our first, most effective counter to them would be to take out the eyes and commanding ears on the ground, which we have great force projection capability on the ground. If we take out their eyes and command and ears, they have no ability to command their forces in space. So the second principle that really comes out of this is that there's probably no question at some point in taking the high ground and becoming superior in space, we'll need force projection in space. But to assist that, the more you can move up these plateaus, the more resilient of a space system you're going to have, and the more time you're going to buy your force projection capabilities. And to be able to move up these plateaus in space, there's a very simple principle here, and that is if you can lower the cost in your space nodes, you have a more affordable chance of being able to move up these plateaus of multiple nodes, multiple orbits, maneuvering nodes, and reconstitutional nodes. So there's two real key resiliency principles that we think play out and really need to be played in this whole Milsatcom environment, and that is eliminate vulnerabilities to ground-based threats, and two, make your space nodes as affordable as they can so you can move up to higher resiliency. Now, I think with those two principles, there's a lot of synergy there with regard to affordability. Because when you look at affordability, not only do we believe we're not going to be able to have the luxury of spending tens and hundreds of thousands to $1 versus our adversary in the future, but we believe the cycle times and the technologies are going to advance quickly, and that plays right together with having affordable nodes and distributed nodes. And so the more you can have affordable nodes and distributed nodes, the more you can move to production lines, to capabilities of lower cycle times, to capabilities that enable this kind of development. Let me say, though, when we talk about affordability, and I don't want to go into this too deep, but in our opinion, the number one issue on affordability at Milsatcom is not the cost of any one system, but it's the number of systems that we have to support. When you look at any one of these systems and to support the terminals, the space, the ground, the O&M, etc., and it's 10, 20, $30 billion over a 10-year life to support a system, and most of the money is in the terminals and in integrating these terminals to the platforms. The biggest cost in affordability is that most of our platforms have 6, 7, 8 different kind of comm systems on a platform. Our biggest affordability issue is that the DoD has developed a huge spaghetti architecture of Milsatcom, and it's primarily driven by when a platform goes and decides what kind of comm they have, they decide to go get whatever's affordable and available. And they don't really limit themselves to anything. And so now when we go out and develop an F-35 or a U-class or a BAMS or whatever, everybody goes and grabs whatever they want, and it creates this massive spaghetti architecture of Milsatcom, which we know is not very effective. And And so one of the things that I would say is that if we really want to address affordability, we've got to get at a higher enterprise level and start to optimize the kind of systems we want, a protected system, an omni system, etc., and then force our platforms to move within that domain. And when we do that, that will enable us to build more nodes, to build affordable nodes, to build production, to reduce cycle time, and these nodes will be robust. If we have a whole bunch of nodes, which we have now, but they're not robust, if I build a $30 billion system and I can take it out for $10 million or $5 million, it doesn't help me if I have 5 of those systems that are now $100 billion and I can take those out for $10 million. The reality, stacking a bunch of fragile systems on itself does not give me resiliency against an adversary. And so I would just say in closing, there's a huge synergy here between affordability and resiliency. And I think we need to really understand those synergies in getting to production, reduce cycle time, taking advantage of technology, staying ahead of our adversary, because the only way we're going to get these two is if we really take into account affordability and resiliency.
Greg, thank you. That's